Anthony Allcock, Chief Information and Digital Officer of British Airways, has over 20 years' experience in delivering multi-million-pound complex change programs. Hear Anthony's advice on using big data to help develop a coherent strategy. He stresses the importance of a single point of truth for the data and the confidence to use it. Anthony's top 3 tips for delivering the strategy: be bold in ambition, have clear accountability, and ensure collaboration throughout the organisation. When trying to get a strategy to land, you need to focus on no more than 3 clear messages that resonate with the whole organisation, keep them simple, repeat them constantly, and tailor them to the audience. Welcome to this episode of Implementing Best Practice in Business. We're here to help you and your organisation understand and implement global best practice to help you face the business challenges of today. Join me, Richard Pharro, CEO of APMG International, in talking to leaders and practitioners who have applied these frameworks and practices to boost their productivity. They're here, willing to share their knowledge and experience to help you learn from them so you can do the same to make you more competitive in today's market. My guest today is Anthony Allcock. Anthony has been a digital leader with over 20 years' experience delivering at the intersection of business strategy, IT and transformation. He's worked for a number of household names. He's defined and executed multi-million-pound complex portfolios and developed a global team that's necessary to succeed whilst establishing and maintaining board and executive relationships. Quite an achievement. But his business passion is to drive business value from IT-enabled change. Yep. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you, Richard.
So tell me, with all the changes there are in the world, how can you actually develop a coherent strategy when so much of the business environment is continuously changing? Yeah, how do you focus and actually zero in on something?
It's a really interesting question. I think, strategy for me is setting out a vision and a strategic intent of kind of the pivot, the North Star of where a company or where a function or department wants to get to. But I think you're right. There's so much that changed. So one thing that's for certain is, changes life. And therefore, whatever your kind of strategy is developed, it needs to cater for change. And, there's simple things that you can do. And one of the tools that I've always used is just simple SWOT analysis. I think always going back and just refreshing kind of your strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats as an organization, which takes into account that kind of changing, macro or micro kind of changes within the organization or outside of the organization. I think equally, I'm a big fan of the PESTLE analysis. Again, just looking outwards in. And I guess it depends also where your function or your business is in terms of its life cycle. But for me, it's something that I do, at least once a year. Just refresh it, just have a look. Things change. And particularly through COVID, we've seen that, organizations, companies have had to fundamentally pivot their business models to be able to respond to market conditions. So, I think having simple statements around strategies, along the lines of, we want to kill the competition is a great strategic intent. But the reality is there's going to be lots of things that hit you that distract you from that.
That's a fascinating comment. As you say, it's very easy to have that one-liner, that headline-grabbing strategy. But when it comes to the execution and the delivery of the strategy, you've worked on some major programs in the past. So what would be your top 3 tips to embed the strategy into an organization and make sure it's actually executed rather than always just discussed?
I think for me, keep it simple. I think always focus on kind of 3 clear messages that you want to give through that strategy. Repeat them constantly to all of your stakeholders, whether that be the board, whether that be your peers, or be it, the organization. I think, driving collaboration as well through the organization. So it's really difficult to do a strategy in isolation because there's so many different people that are impacted by it. So I think, a surefire way of seeing whether your strategy is landed is actually going deeper into the organization and ensuring there's a consistency of language. Keep the message simple. I think, it's credible to say that you can only hold 7 things in your head at any one time. So, trying to get a strategy and a strategy to land, you've got to synthesize the message to something really simple. So, taking the De La Soul song, 3 is a magic number. So as you're writing a strategy, think about the 3 most important points you want the board or your colleagues or your stakeholders to take away with them.
So that's interesting. But with the growth of big data and the volume of information that's now available, does that actually open up more choice? Or does that help us to clarify, narrow the choices when you're developing the strategic plan? Yeah, the organizations you worked with must have been awash with data, but how do you make sense of that and actually put it into your succinct strategy? Review it and realign it at various times. But aren't you overwhelmed with information?
Absolutely. And I think, ever more so now, there's more data that you're learning about your organization, but actually more external data you can bring in to help make decisions. I think for me, it's kind of thinking about this. It doesn't matter how big your data is. It's what you do with the data. So I think having strong analytics capability and mined correctly, structured in the right framework. And I think equally, be clear on the questions that you're trying to answer, because you can drown in the data nowadays. And I've seen many companies kind of drowning in the data, not being clear on what the strategic imperatives that they're trying to answer. And equally, how do we start to drive better decisions across the organization using that data? So for me, it's not necessarily, how much data you can ingest. It's about what you do with the data you've got around you. And from that, you learn, and then you ingest more data.
And it's your experience that people believe the data, or do they still want to come back to what they believed intuitively, even though the data's telling them otherwise?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it depends, and it depends on the people that are using the data. I think business sometimes can be led by ego and gut feel, and sometimes that's okay because that's how businesses succeed. Other businesses, more diligence around the data, using data to drive insights. I think for me, when I've delivered data strategies and data frameworks, for me, having the gold standard data, just be clear, single source of the truth, identify those systems of record that you want to pull the data from, being clear about the quality of that data. And actually, if you get to that, then you shouldn't be in a situation where you're challenging different data sources. So having that clear data architecture, clear governance that underpins it, and then leveraging that data to make clear decisions.
I often read about when organizations want to effect major change, you might need to sort of replace the existing leadership team because they're sort of anchored in the old way of thinking. In your experience, you've probably worked with new teams and you've worked with existing teams. Is there really much difference, or can a leadership team actually introduce a new strategy and deliver it successfully?
I think, again, it comes back to the strategic imperative. What are you trying to change, and why are you trying to change it? And I think if you've got a join up at the leadership team, the executive team, the need to change. So the burning platform, if you think about Kotter, is really important. I think equally, as Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And there's some truth in that as well, that says actually you fundamentally need the right culture to drive the change. So I think, at the top, making sure that you've got alignment in terms of why you need to change, the pivot of a new strategic direction. I think then you need buy-in, and getting buy-in means collaboration. So I don't think it's true of the fact that you need to replace your leadership team, whether that's a functional leadership team or an executive business leadership team. But equally, if you've not got people on board and don't see the need to change, then you need to make change within.
But, you work for some pretty large organizations. How do you get that message right the way from the board through to, the guys, the team on the shop floor? How long do you think it takes you to get that message through the organization so everyone is on board with those key points and the way the business is moving? Yeah,
I think it comes down to circumstances. If you're making a strategic change because it's do or die, e.g. the survival of the business depends on it, that becomes really easy to cascade a message. We must take cost out of the organization to survive. That message you can clearly drive into the organization to the bluntness of, if we don't make change, we won't survive. I think if you're making a more subtle change, e.g. you're changing your product and you're moving into a different market, sometimes that can be a bit more difficult in terms of why we're changing. What's driving the change? Is this about, the future growth of the business? Because fundamentally, people in the organization will always look at change in terms of what's in it for me. How does this impact me? Does this change what I'm going to do? Does this give me job security? Do I believe in the change that's been made? So I think, making change in an organization can go anywhere between, immediately, e.g. days, to months, if not years sometimes, in terms of changing the culture of the organization, creating alignment. I think for me, it's the consistency of message. I mean, I've seen many an organization, cascade a new strategic direction, build in a transformation plan around it. And two failure points for me is one, they keep changing the strategic direction. So people get confused. There's no consistency that goes on. And equally, in terms of them resourcing kind of the transformation program that will sit behind it. So with any strategic change, you then need to embed that strategic change, is actually not resourcing it. So sometimes you have heroes that, fundamentally passionately believe about the change, and they take that change so far forward. But actually, if you've not got the mechanism beneath that, then to continue to embed as it goes down the layers of management or the organization, that's really difficult. And I think finally, I'd probably just think about, how do you make it real for people? So talking about big corporate strategies and what that's doing to the P&L and what that's doing to the bottom line won't switch on some of the people in the organization. So you need to cascade, the message to somebody that might be further down the organization in terms of what does it mean to them? And sometimes it could be as simple as just come to work and smile, because that's all I need you to do, because that will help us embed, the change that we're looking to make.
So you've been involved in a number of strategy execution programs and projects. When you look back over your experience, what are the 2 or 3 things you know now that you would have loved to have known on the first execution?
Great question. I think be bold in ambition would probably be number 1. So I think sometimes, you're defining a strategy and you're almost just, you're trying to see what's happening in the organization. You're trying to play to a number of stakeholders. You're fearful of overcommitting, but actually sometimes that overcommitting is the thing that moves you forward and moves the needle. So having a bold ambition, sometimes, even if you don't meet the ambition, actually getting close to that ambition is sometimes good enough. So I think being bold, definitely in the ambition of strategic intent. I think having clear accountability as well in terms of how you're going to execute that strategy. A strategy can be led from the top, absolutely from the CEO or the chairman or the board. But equally, you, as I said before, you want engagement from within. So you've got to think about how you deploy that strategy and make it real for people. And equally, finally, probably getting buy-in. And that's really difficult. Probably the most difficult part of a strategy is getting buy-in to that strategy, because you're taking different opinions. And to your earlier point, you've got to think about, are you using data to help, justify the strategic change and prove out that that's the right direction? So how do you test the strategy? And I think getting people's buy-in to that can be incredibly difficult, because you're dealing with different people that engage differently in different ways. Some people are data orientated, some people are kind of more feeling orientated. So I think for me, be bold, think about how you're going to embed that change, with clear accountabilities of how you want to cascade down. And then most importantly, just make sure you've got your stakeholders. The worst strategy in the world is where you're out leading it and you've got nobody behind you.
Yeah. What was it? The guy that's running naked through the shopping centre and people following him as a leader. But if he's alone, he's a fruitcake. Exactly. Brilliant. Anthony, many thanks for your time. I know there's a lot going on in your day job, so thanks for finding time to talk to me. And hopefully we can speak again.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks.
Thank you for listening. We're always keen to hear your feedback and suggestions for future episodes. You can find all the information in the show notes below. Please visit apmg-international.com to find out more about our accredited training and the certifications that support them that are related to the topics discussed in this series. I hope you've enjoyed today, and I look forward to you joining future episodes while we continue our exploration into best practice and the benefits it brings to global business. Thank you.